I'll share it on the Discord too.
Oh, good call. Yeah. I doubt
Dude,
the pickup will be the same as last time, but
I can't believe how many people we had last time too.
all right. Yeah, it looks like we're live. So, welcome everyone to the Phase Two Devils in the Details Draft Lottery. Phase Two, yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. I'm not sure any of us really expected the amount of teams we have here, the specific teams, rather. Um, and the thought of the Oilers winning yet another first overall in a year when they don't really deserve it is kind of horrifying. But yeah, welcome everyone who's joining us today. We'll find out exactly how much trouble we're in about 30 minutes. But Ian, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. We're here. There's no pressure. There's only one. Honestly, we'll get into this in a little bit, but there's only one team that I really don't want to win. Other than that, I don't really care. Just here
Yeah,
to see where the next future of hockey ends up. Hopefully, not across the river. What can we say?
hopefully
The
not
rivalry
across.
runs deep.
Yeah, I think that's basically the only thing Devils fans will want to make sure of. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple quirky ones in there, but we'll get to that, as you said, in a little bit. So we're going to hang out for like 30 minutes while we get started. The draft lottery itself is at 6 o'clock. I think it'll be pretty quick because, to my understanding, it's going to be Gary Bettman with the lottery machine pulling a single ball out. So it's going to be very straightforward. I expect they'll probably try to drag it out for like 10 or 15 minutes regardless. And then we'll chat a bit afterwards. We'll celebrate and or cry together, and then we'll go from there. So yeah, draft lottery actually starts at 6. So we'll see what happens. I wanted to go over this because this was really confusing to me even like a week ago. For the next kind of portion of the playoffs, or I guess the actual playoffs, who we should be cheering for. And I guess this is somewhat up for debate because you might have varying levels of spite or cynicism or whatever you want to call it. But here's kind of how I saw this. And this is me as a Taylor Hall fan, and I realize not everyone is because he left, in a really up and down season. But it is totally okay to cheer for the Coyotes for the next 2 rounds, right? Because they made the playoffs, we get their first round pick this year, regardless. There's no question about that. And it's right now sitting at about the 19th overall. And it only moves back if they make it to the Western Conference Finals. So theoretically, you could vote or root for the Coyotes to make it past the Colorado Avalanche, which is maybe optimistic, and cheer for Taylor Hall and not get penalized in terms of the pick. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, honestly, you had one job, Nashville, but yeah, we'll see. I mean, honestly, the the major, the two key players, not to get into a whole series breakdown, but the two players that stand out as most important for that would be Kemper, if he can
Yeah.
continue playing really solidly and at his almost Vezina level, which he was playing at before he got injured in the season, which is how this whole potential top 10 pick even came into discussion, and Hall. So I have no problem rooting for him.
Yeah, and I mean there is the added benefit, right? If they beat the Colorado Avalanche in the first round, next year's pick upgrades from a third to a second, and leaves room for that to be upgraded to a first if Taylor Hall resigns. Now, I'm not sure exactly how realistic it is that he would resign on a team that just recently had what I might call a high school breakup with their general manager. It's, everyone's saying different things, people are choosing sides, but all we know is they're not together anymore. And it might be our fault somehow. But it is there. So if they do win, which I think is unlikely, we get the second, which is great, but we also leave open the potential for the first, which I think is worth it. Even if you don't like Taylor Hall anymore, that's objectively good. So I think you could be, rooting for the Coyotes, no problem. If nothing else, root for the jerseys because they're amazing. Next is Vancouver. So because they made the playoffs, we also get their first round pick. I think it's sitting at 20th overall. It might be 21st. My math was really bad today. And it only moves back again if they make it to the Western Conference Finals. So you could root for them. There's not really a reason to my knowledge. No doubles connections. But there it is. I guess you could if you wanted to. The only thing we're looking for is for them not to make it to the Western Conference Finals. And the last one I could find was the Carolina pick. So we have a 4th round pick right now. And that upgrades to a 3rd if Vatanen plays in 70% of their games, regardless of how many games there are. So that could be a 1st round exit and he plays 70%, or it could be all the way to the finals. It doesn't matter. So I guess it's less rooting for Carolina than it is Sandy Vatanen.
Yeah, and also there was some kind of leniency, I think, on if Carolina lost their qualifying round series against the Rangers, that they could choose whether or not that 4th round pick would be this year or next year. But because they won the series, the pick goes to us this year.
Yeah.
And I mean, Vatanen looked great. He looked great.
He looked amazing. He was like a top 2, top 3 D-man on that team for the qualifying round. He looked amazing.
And on the top power play unit, I mean, he played. I don't see any reason why he's not going to play at least 70% of the games based off of his performance against the Rangers, if nothing else.
Yep. Yeah, I think the only thing that would hurt him there is injury. And I hesitate to even say that out loud because, the history is there. But he's looked great so far. So if nothing else, root for him, root for the Coyotes, and, hope Vancouver doesn't make it too far. That's basically what I'm going for. I haven't actually had a chance to watch too many of the games this year. I think I watched one of the Maple Leafs games on Friday, and I think I watched like 2 periods of one of kind of the warm-up games. So I'm actually excited to watch just because it's been way too long and it's going to be a while yet. So I'm excited. I'm just excited to see what happens.
It's been how do I say it? It's been quite the opposite over here. It's just been on all day, every day, from noon until maybe 1 a.m. or so. Maybe not actively watching it so much, a lot of active watching, but just having it on too. I mean,
you have a very patient partner.
Yes. Yeah. I'll admit too, it was kind of tough to follow the Panthers Islanders series. I don't know, that just felt like a slog, But anyway.
Yeah, that's not terribly surprising, just given the 2 teams. But there it is. I wanted to talk about one more thing because there are other teams we could be looking at. So just because of how things shook out, both 12 seeds made it into the playoffs, which is ludicrous, basically. So we should be rooting for each of these teams, the Montreal Canadiens, Chicago Blackhawks, and Calgary Flames. So because Arizona and Vancouver are where they are, like 19, 20, 21, if these teams make it to the Western Conference Finals, that bumps Arizona and or Vancouver down. So if you're up for rooting for underdogs, here we are. It only moves us down 1 spot. We're up 1 spot. That's a confusing thing to try to describe in the draft. Either way, the pick's better if these teams make it to the conference finals, whether it's one, both, or all 3 of them. So definitely something to look out for as well. I'm not sure how likely it is that any of these teams make it to the Western or Eastern Conference Finals. I'm looking specifically at Chicago and Montreal. But I think anything could happen at this point just because the time off everyone had, I think, has a really big effect. But, I've definitely been wrong before. So here are the teams we're looking at for tonight. Each of them has a 12.5% chance to make it to the first overall pick. And this is alphabetical order. This is definitely not in order of preference by any stretch of the imagination. Edmonton Oilers, Florida Panthers, Minnesota Wild, Nashville Predators, New York Rangers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Winnipeg Jets. So there are some frightening names on that list, and then some names of some pretty sad teams that could use a leg up. So Ian, before we got to this stream, right? Yeah,
that's a fantastic segue.
We both looked at what team we wanted to win based on personal preference or some other metric, and also what team most needed to win. And I think you're at first. So what did you come up with?
I tried not to be too biased with this. My preference is the Minnesota Wild. If anything else, just a team out in the West. But, I mean, Minnesota, when was the last all-star superstar that they had on their team? Besides when Suter and Parise signed.
I was going to say, we're not going to mention Parise because I would understand if we didn't. But
it's
yeah,
been,
other than that,
it's been not like 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, I mean, they've just been floundering as a franchise, and I don't know, it looked like they're trying to actually turn it around and go for a rebuild to the best of their ability, and they've already got, they need a center. They need high-end centers. They've got a pretty good defensive core, but I mean, having a young core on the wing of Fiala, Kaprizov, and Lafreniere, I mean, that's a really good group of wingers. And they're also, oh gosh, what's his name? From the USNTDP last year, the winger.
Oh, Boldy.
Boldy, yeah. Boldy, yeah. I mean, that's a really, really solid top 4 or top 6 winger group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would be exciting for the first time in a long time, if if ever. There's a reason why some people call them the Minnesota Mild, just because it's very, very flat. So I think Lafreniere would be a good, I think this is interesting though. Like I'd agree, they're definitely one of the teams that needs them the most. Is it just in terms of preference, the fact that they would actually be exciting?
Yeah, and also, I mean, get them out of the Eastern Conference, preferably out of the division. I mean, we've already had enough really, really high draft picks in our division. No idea whose fault that is, but just get them out into the Western Conference. That'll be nice. And also, I really want to see a good hockey team in Minnesota. I mean, the quote unquote state of hockey should have a really good team. I really want to see.
I think that's fair. Yeah, what a beautiful way to put that. I think I've always loved their jerseys too, and especially years ago when I was a much younger hockey fan, the hatred for Minnesota was real because of Parise and kind of how that ended. And that was my first real hockey loss, I think. Right, like I started following the team maybe in 2009, 2010. We went to the Stanley Cup Finals. Zach Parise, the young star, the captain, and walks away. That was tough. So I think I'm at the point where I'm over it, and I'm just happy to root for them. And like you said, Lafreniere out of the division and the conference, it definitely goes a long way. So
I'm not going to be too greedy. I mean, just out of the division is nice.
Yeah, that's enough for me. And speaking of segues, in terms of need, I agree that the Minnesota Wild are up there. I put the Florida Panthers here. I don't necessarily disagree with Minnesota, but Florida is a team that has been extremely mediocre in the same way that the Wild have. And they do have, I think, higher end talent compared to the Wild. Like I think of Alexander Barkov, Huberdeau. Maybe that's kind of where the list ends, though. Hoffman's definitely good at shooting the puck. Aaron Ekblad is a great young defenseman, but not necessarily like exactly where you'd want to see someone that goes first overall. So I'd put them up there.
Hoffman's going to walk too, because I think he's a pending UFA.
I think it's budget cuts, man. I think they're going to gut that team. Especially seeing, Dale Talon losing his post as general manager or not having his contract renewed, however you want to put that. I think that team isn't spending any money anytime soon, which makes it even more important that Lafreniere goes there, right? You need like entry level talent that's going to outperform their value of their contract. So if you're a team that really needs to cut the budget, it doesn't get much better than a first overall, right? So to me, that's kind of the logical choice. In terms of preference, though, I completely agree. Minnesota, I think, is definitely the spot. Out of the conference, out of the division, it's a team that has a good defensive core and has started to get some like nice, exciting, dynamic wingers. The Kaprizov signing was really cool. I don't have any stake in this team, but I was really anxious for them to actually sign him because the whole thing about not being able to sign those like black aces for the playoffs didn't make any sense to me. And I was worried that ruling would have like discouraged Kaprizov from signing, and then it would be another year away from the NHL and another year closer to UFA status. And I think the game's better when, the most exciting prospects actually make it to the NHL. So, I'm excited about Minnesota. I hope they make it. Those are probably the top two for me. I almost put Winnipeg as well. That's another team that has really had it rough the past couple seasons just in terms of disappointing. They've had some really high expectations. Obviously, the thing with Bufflin was a bit messy this year as well. So they probably would have been my third choice.
Yeah, Winnipeg would be super interesting as well because they already have such high caliber players on the wing. They've got guys like Laine, Wheeler, Ehlers. Connor's a winger, right? So yeah. So I mean, it would be really interesting to see what happens there. I'll just throw this out there. Team chaos or whatever you want to call it. I think the absolute funniest result would be Edmonton. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I think watching Lafreniere play with McDavid would be a sight to behold, right? Like that's about as good as it gets. Same with Crosby even, and I hesitate to even talk about the Penguins tonight before the draw. There's a team that doesn't need all that much luck because they've somehow always managed to be relatively competitive, despite the fact that they lost to Montreal, the 12th seed. But Lafreniere and Crosby, or Lafreniere and Malkin, like forget about it.
Yeah.
Like the amount of center depth that team has that could help shelter the kid in his first couple seasons is insane.
And there is also I don't really need to. We've already mentioned that we want him out of the division, but there is kind of a poetic aspect to him going to Pittsburgh in the sense that, not only is he a first overall projected pick, playing out of Rimouski of the QMJHL, just like Crosby was, but I mean, you really have to start to wonder if the Penguins' window is closed or just about closed. And I know it's almost rash to say because you can't really make too many assumptions off of a best of 5 qualifying series. But, this and last year's sweep of the Islanders, who knows? Maybe they're not getting any younger, that. But maybe there's that poetic aspect of like one more run that a guy like Lafreniere, who could immediately step in and contribute, would provide. That being said,
and it's a beautiful way to pass the torch too, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't want to see it happen either, but the next French Canadian star to come through out of the QMJHL. Not the Crosby French Canadian, but he came out of the Q anyways. There's something very poetic about that too. And you see them potentially have a couple more seasons to try to, actually compete. and then a transition period of bringing in kind of the new era. I'm not terribly familiar with Pittsburgh's prospect system, just because everyone I know that they've drafted, just off the top of my head, I think they've traded, like specifically with like the Zucker trade. Didn't Kalen Addison move the other way to Minnesota?
Yes, and Galchenyuk. But they do also have Poulin and Legare.
Right. Yeah.
So they've got some goal-scoring wingers.
Yeah.
In their system.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting too, but I agree. Team Chaos is definitely the Edmonton Oilers.
Oh, yeah.
And I shudder at the thought. I'm definitely not Team Chaos. I don't think I've ever been Team Chaos. But the other one is definitely the Maple Leafs too, because it would, after the loss last night, especially being shut out when the big three forwards for the Maple Leafs had a cap hit roughly equivalent to all of the forwards on the Columbus Blue Jackets. That's caused a bit of a shitstorm, right? Like a very big reaction to, as you said, a 5-game series. If they won tonight and had the chance to draft Lafreniere, or if they started to maybe overthink it by Field or Stützle, that would only encourage the overthinking, I think, because they'd start to be like, well, we have Lafreniere, so how much do we actually need Mitch Marner? Or how much do we actually need William Nylander? I could definitely see that sort of cascading effect. Not that I think Dubas is like a reactionary guy, but at the end of the day, it's not always the general manager's decision, right? We've seen that time and time again, especially in markets like Vancouver, where there is a directive from ownership or team leadership to be like, okay, we need to shake things up, or we need to make sure we're making win now moves. If you get Lafreniere, does that free you up to trade someone else for help on defense? I don't think that's a smart move, but I could definitely see a lot of public pressure to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see them considering, not that either team, I don't know if either team would do this, but it seems like there's interesting value around like a Nylander for Matt Dumba swap, which would be, I think, interesting because Toronto definitely needs help on the right side of their defense. But that's an embarrassment of riches, if anything.
And at the same time, I'd argue that Nylander probably provides the most value per dollar of the big 3 or 4. If you want
to, because Marner's contract. That, right? Yeah. I don't disagree with that. But like Marner's contract, he's a damn good player, but I don't know if. I'm not going to say it's not tradable, but that's going to be very difficult to move, especially with a flat cap.
Well, that's the thing too, right? All of this is made so much more complicated by COVID and the flat cap, and I agree Marner's contract is a lot to swallow. At the same time, I would take him on this team at that dollar value immediately. I mean, I would want to know what the price is first in terms of trade, but for a team that has as much cap as we do, I think that's a move you make, a la PK Subban, right? Like we would be the one team that would be able to take the cap at full value and, make the rest of it work. I think that's a tried and true method. Even if Subban didn't, bear the most fruit this season, I think that approach definitely has merit. So, I like him. He's definitely had an interesting short legacy in Toronto in terms of going from the hometown hero to, a greedy young man to, basically a scapegoat in the course of 16 months. So, well, I don't know. I just think that's another one of those Team Chaos ones where you just see, okay, Lafreniere is an objectively good thing for them, but it's going to cause a shitstorm because of all the public pressure to trade, any one of the big 4, I guess, outside of Matthews and Tavares. So maybe just the big 2,
Yeah, and all of this is made even more complex or honed in more because the Maple Leafs shot less than 2%. They had a less than 2% shooting percentage during that series, which was just unbelievable work.
But at the same time, right? It's about timeline too. Like Anderson isn't getting younger. Barry, who was a big experiment for them, is probably walking.
Isn't
And
Anderson a UFA next year, not this year?
I think it's next year.
Yeah.
So they have that piece, a backbone of their team for the past couple seasons, getting older and approaching UFA. And you have to make a decision about goalies over the age of 30. Tyson Barrie, who they invested a ton of capital in terms of trading Nazem Kadri, he's probably walking. This was the season to try, and it just didn't work. And it just happened to be a best of 5 as opposed to best of 7. But that's the case for everybody, right? Like Montreal took advantage, and they sold at the deadline. That's the tricky part about all this, is that they were designed to compete this season, just based on their contract schedule, and they shot 2%. So like, what do? You don't want to make an overreaction, but you also
there's
have
historical
a
context.
timeline. Yeah.
It's historical.
Right. It will be in, history in terms of sports. Like next week, this will be historical. So
yeah.
Man, it's complicated. I feel for Dubas, just because the amount of pressure that's going to be on him to either make changes or not to be reactionary. It's just going to be insane.
Especially in the pressure cooker environment that is the Toronto, ecosphere.
Is Toronto a pressure cooker for hockey meetings?
I've heard. I think so.
My Twitter feed today, just because I live in the GTA, was insane. You go from Steve Dangle to Justin Bourne mentioning or calling out specifically Nordic players on the Maple Leafs. I was like, oh, that's an interesting approach to hockey criticism, is specifying ethnicity. That's like Don Cherry-esque. And I haven't thought about Don Cherry in probably 9 calendar months, so I guess it's a throwback. I don't know. Man. Okay, we're coming up on 6, so I'm going to pull up the stream here. Any other thoughts about, best or worst case scenarios today?
No, just one worst case scenario. Yeah.
Dare we talk about it?
I feel like it almost doesn't need to be mentioned.
It definitely would be horrific, right? I don't necessarily want to think about Lafreniere across the river, but at the same time, he'd obviously have a big impact there. That's probably the only one I'd be upset about.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned, Toronto and Edmonton. I think Winnipeg would be nice. We talked about Minnesota and Florida. Who else was in this thing? Are we missing anything? Also looking at these commercials without having eaten dinner, and this is killing me.
Oh, by the way, we have Devils news to talk about while this is loading up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Last little pleasant surprise. We signed Riley Walsh to an entry-level contract, which is interesting because I think the ECAC is not playing hockey next season due to COVID. And, I can't remember his name, but a Carolina prospect playing for Harvard, same place that Walsh was playing, signed with a Swedish league team. So I had no idea what to expect for what Walsh's plans were. So that's really neat that signed there. And it's really a pretty smart move on his part, because while organizationally we need defensemen that can defend, he does have a unique skill set, and I think already one of the stronger shots, one of the better shots in the organization.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I tweeted out today after I saw the news, which was a total shock. I think we were both in the same boat. Yeah. So, I think this has more to do with the NCAA than the Devils, which is kind of a cynical thing to say, but I think it's probably true, right? Like, there was the question of if he was going to sign, because usually players that sign do so okay, this is just a recap. They do so after their junior year, right? Going the senior year typically signals that they're going to USA and they're going to choose their fate, which is something I completely respect just from a labor perspective, but we can get into that kind of philosophical conversation later. But I think this has more to do with the fact that Harvard wasn't going to play until at least 2021, if that. So I'm definitely happy it worked out well for us just because he is a good player. It's funny, I wrote an article about Case McCarthy a couple weeks ago, and I listed where he would fit in amongst the other defensive prospects. And I didn't even list Riley Walsh because I was like, I don't want, like, I was pretty sure he just wasn't going to be around. So let's talk about him in terms of like the Kevin Balls, Nikita Okachuks, Ty Smiths of the world. Where would you rank him in terms of our defensive prospects?
Walsh?
Yeah.
I'm going to try and go in order here. Okay. 1 is still Smith.
Yeah.
2, I would say, is Mishuel. Yeah, I'm really high on him. 3 is Ball.
Yeah.
I think I would put Walsh at 4, behind Ball and in front of Okochuk.
I think that's
If
fair.
for no other reason than Walsh's offensive potential. So he didn't exactly take that step forward too much that we were hoping for this season, but the skills are still all there, and this is it's an entry-level contract. It's a no-risk signing. So
I wonder what Walsh's reaction would be if we suddenly traded for Fox to be like, oh, I'm finally out from underneath him in the depth chart, and oh shit, the Devils just traded for Adam Fox. But it looks like we're getting to business here, so I'm just gonna work on the volume here. Like I said,
help of smart play machine tech Nick Margaret, and all under the watchful eye of Ernst & Young Scott Clark and NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Joking about that at first.
And here are the 8 teams, all with a 1.
I heard that from Bushinsky from ESPN.
In the NHL's qualifying round.
So, by the way, the name of the prospect, somebody on the Discord.
He put up a staggering 112 points in 52 games in the Quebec Major Junior League this season. He also dominated the World Juniors with 4 goals and 6 assists in 5 games, taking home that tournament's MVP award. According to scouts, he is a spectacular puck handler and playmaker. Only 2 players in CHL history have won the Player of the Year award twice. The first was Sidney Crosby. The second, Lafreniere. For more on this dynamic winger, let's head over to the studio.
Lafreniere, and where he would be drafted
what a resume, Jamie. My goodness, 8 teams eliminated from the postseason. Not a bad consolation prize. The 2-time reigning CHL Player of the Year. Let's welcome in our insiders. Sam Cosentino, Brian Burke, Elliot Friedman. We start with you, Sam. You've been watching Lafreniere for the last 3 years. How good is this guy?
Well, typically you hear the term makes those around him better, and that term is normally reserved for a center iceman. What you're getting with Lafreniere is a winger who gives you center-type qualities and center-type production. And when I go back and look at the start of his career with Rimouski,
for another minute or so. Yeah, man, I'm so mad about the way the first lottery went. I'm not sure if that's just me being bitter or what, but I still can't believe they actually even allowed for the chance for this to happen.
Yeah, it definitely should have still been the 7 teams that didn't make it. The 7 teams that had no chance of getting to the Stanley Cup final. But whatever. It allows them to have 2 draft lottery nights this year. So
yeah,
I'm
just mad, especially the way they shook out, right? In terms of like Montreal and Chicago, and specifically, I guess Pittsburgh, Edmonton, the Torontos of the world, that sort of thing. It's one thing for it to be like a Montreal, because that's a really nice storyline, right? Like the hometown kid, so to speak, French Canadian superstar, but they were supposed to have the draft this year. So that's kind of a nice consolation. Yeah, I'm still not over it. I don't think I'll be over it for a while unless he goes to, you know, one of the teams I guess we talked about, you know. Yeah, I don't know. It just bugs me. But I guess this is team chaos. So, you know, what else do you expect?
Yeah, and it also means that we have to be a lot more serious, I guess, about who we pick at 7. Not that we weren't going to be serious anyway, but there's no leniency of like, okay, you know, we like both of these guys. We can pick one and then hope that the other is there at, you know, 11 or wherever that Yotes pick would have been.
Yeah.
But there, I mean, we'll get to it after the decision and whether or not we rage. Now, who should be on the board?
Yeah,
by those picks. But honestly, like, we're not involved, so it's a little easier to just sit back.
Yeah, it's pretty low stakes for us, I think. And man, I wonder how much. This is slightly off topic, but we're just seeing an image of Lafreniere. He's going to watch this live. How much training do you think he's had not to have a reaction to what happens here?
Yeah.
Because that was the whole Connor McDavid thing, right?
It's like the opposite of McDavid.
Yeah. You know, I don't even know how fair that was because I think he was pretty good at, you know, having quite a blank face.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids have so much media training by the time they even get to the draft, but it's, you know, they're pretty refined. But that's got to be so stressful. Apart from, you know, the fact that your fate for the next 7+ years is being decided by a strange man on stage with a machine. You know, the fact that everyone is going to dissect every single like twitch of your face is just killer. I had a question about this. And I'm curious about what your response is. So the fact that the first overall is going to go to a team that is of a higher tier of success broadly than, you know, the lottery teams themselves, like the traditional lottery teams. Do you think that makes it more likely that someone doesn't draft Lafreniere? Or that's just like too much, you know, galaxy brain overthinking?
I think that's a little bit too galaxy brain. Because, I mean, there's still going to be weaknesses for the team if they're in playoff contention. But generally speaking, I mean, like take the Devils, for example. I mean, we needed help at almost any position. So I think it would be the opposite. Like if it would be more of a team that really needed help everywhere to well, no, let me take that back. If your team is that good already to contend for a playoff spot, you're going to pick VPA to just get you over the hump, if anything. That I don't know.
Like I know BPA is definitely like the mantra. It's like the thing
you're
to
thinking,
do.
Yeah, you're thinking like if for example the Rangers win the pick and they desperately need high-end centers, do they roll the dice on like a Byfield or Stützle?
Yeah, or even like I think to some extent, unless you're Steve Yzerman, the consensus opinion does have an effect, right? Like your scouts, you obviously have to trust them, and that's what it comes down to. But I'm curious if there are teams that have, for example, Stützle or Byfield, you know, 1A and 1B with Lafreniere, and I think there are teams that do have that range of opinion, whether it's Stützle or Byfield. Does the fact that you are a better team, just in general, free you up to make the 1B decision than the 1A, if it comes down to preference in terms of actual position? That might be splitting hairs. I don't know. But.
I don't know. I think I know what you're getting at. I think I understand. Perhaps not all teams are as bullish in their confidence for their pick as Yzerman, but I think, you know, no matter what, they go with their guy, and maybe that's dodging the question a little bit. But.
It's a lawyer answer, Ian. You're gonna do well.
Yeah, no. The real answer is it depends.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, it is best player available, but I think opinions on who the best player is sometimes much finer than we think publicly. And that's based on zero information, but just kind of a hunch, you know, like I think it does get to the point of splitting hairs sometimes. And I know the range of opinion increases the farther down the draft you go. Like the difference between 1 and 2 is probably much finer than the difference between 7 and 20. You know, just because it just starts to diverge so much. But yeah, I'm just curious, you know, like if Pittsburgh wins positionally, Lafreniere makes a ton of sense for them. But if there's a team that's more center heavy and you think Stützle is as talented as Lafreniere and he can play center, then I wonder if this frees you up to do it a bit more boldly than if you were just, you know, a run-of-the-mill lottery team. But,
yeah, maybe if anything, they try to, if they don't have, like if they have somebody else at number 1, they try and trade down, which is funny because there is a team on there that could be selected that has traded down from the number 1 overall pick.
Who is that?
That was Florida back in 2003.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I think ultimately they go BPA, which, I mean, by all intents and purposes is Lafreniere.
Yeah, that's fair. I have heard just through like reading, you know, draft books and whatever, that there are some teams that don't have Lafreniere first overall. I mean, who knows if they're represented here, but I think there are teams that have that. Whether or not, I guess that's actually true or just something they're floating out there, just, you know, because they're on Team Chaos. But I think there's a possibility, even if I don't necessarily agree. On my personal list, which holds, you know, zero authority, I definitely have Lafreniere first overall. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a team or two that would take someone else before him. It looks like we're getting down to it. This looks very serious.
Yeah.
And I realize it does every year. I don't know if you've ever watched the footage of what happens behind closed doors, but it is not fun in there. It is very much a bunch of accountants.
Here we go. Are they
Nothing
going to have the logos? Okay, yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, here we go. Any predictions, or are we not going to tempt fate like that?
I'm going to go out on a limb and guess. Let me see if I can wait long enough for them to start it. No. Screw it. Winnipeg. I'll guess Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. I was thinking Winnipeg or Nashville.
Yeah.
I think Nashville would be a nice choice too. Not that I necessarily have much love for them at all, but situationally, I think he could do really well there. All right, that's, what was that, Edmonton in there?
1.
Florida. It's honestly quite nice not to have much stake in this because I don't feel remotely as nervous as I did in June.
They're probably going to throw in I don't know if they're going to throw in a commercial break or something. They're going to try and drag this on. Or maybe they have already.
I wonder if they let Gary hit the button to pull, you know?
I think in the footage of previous years they did, right?
I think so. Yeah. Do you want me to check the volume up for this part?
Sure. Yeah, just a little bit, if anything.
It is like the margins are razor thin here.
Not here.
Can you confirm this is the logo of the Nashville Predators?
Oh, Nashville Predators confirmed.
The New York Rangers.
Yeah,
the Rangers owned the first overall pick in the draft only once.
We'll pull the volume once the balls start moving. But yeah, that's a little too much for me. That's like, Survivor.
He dropped the ball in before the logo was confirmed.
Yeah.
Armchair GMs around the league are desperately typing to show how the league has rigged it.
I don't know. So I realized the people who participate in this from like a Ernst & Young perspective, our like accountants and lawyers and stuff,
Yeah.
I would volunteer for this job.
Oh yeah.
You know, it has no importance. I don't think can screw it up all that easily. Although, you know, I guess you could have like a La La Land situation, a la Oscars, which would be disastrous. But I think it would be fun just to be there. You know, I assume Gary Bettman is a very demanding boss, and that's just me knowing
he's a lawyer
about
too.
him. Yeah, I think I still think it'd be kind of fun to be there.
Oh yeah, I think that'd be. I have to imagine that's one of those not as prestigious, but kind of in a similar vein to working in the Green Monster, the wall at Fenway Park. Kind of just,
yeah.
I'm sure it's really cool, if anything, to be there. But all right,
here we go. We've done our
confirmation. Yeah,
ritualistic confirmation.
Mr. Marker,
I guess he's gonna.
You may proceed. In 2019, the Devils selected Jack Hughes with the #1 pick. Who will it be this time around? All eyes are on Alexis Lafreniere, the power forward who scored 48 goals in the QMJHL before even turning 17 years old. Lafreniere took the World Junior Championship by storm this past winter, earning MVP honors as he helped lead Canada to a gold medal.
They're not gonna do
This year, he led all CHL skaters in points per game. His 2.15 average was the highest in the Q since Jonathan Drouin in 2013-14. If Lafreniere is chosen first, he would be the first Quebecois player to go #1 overall since Pittsburgh chose Marc-Andre Fleury with the top pick back in 2003. It is now time to see who the winning team is.
All right, here we go. Yep, it's New York.
Oh no.
The first selection in the 2020 NHL draft belongs to the New York Rangers.
Wow, there it is. The New York Rangers have won the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery. So take a look.
Well, there it is.
Time for salt.
Wow. Immediate thoughts, Ian?
Yeah.
That is, yeah, definitely the worst case scenario here. Yeah, part of me isn't shocked in the slightest, just because, you know, it's just been that kind of year for the Devils. But that's a huge pickup for them. You know, even though they do have, you know, some depth at wing, they definitely have Panarin. Yeah, that's really interesting for them. I'm gonna move away from Jack Gordon's face here, just because I feel like that might be a bit too much for us. But
shame. But
yeah, that's tough.
Just like that.
And the part that I'm gonna dislike the most is that we won't get those. Like, you know, every year we get the winning combination, obviously, and we get to watch the video after the fact, and it's, you know, shaky cam footage, Gary Bettman's throwing papers all over the floor because he's reading through a script. We're not going to get the, you know, the like, oh, with one ball left to draw, X team had the highest chances and this team had the next highest, and it was just this random team that won. It's just one ball. It's that quick, and just devastating too from a Devils perspective. Yeah.
Yep. Get the pitchforks ready. No, I mean, we kind of, prepared for a worst case scenario. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Not much else you can do. Yeah. What a rebuild for them. And I don't want to be too complimentary or anything, but they've had a nice 18 months, give or take. Definitely tricky that they don't have kind of the center depth that you would probably want for a team for the next, 5 or 6 years. Zibanejad is definitely nice. But below that, you have questions about Hedl, Anderson, certainly. That's an interesting story. But I guess if you have the wingers, the rest can kind of sort itself out. Man, I'm like shook. Is that the word to use?
I think that's the word.
I saw blue and I was really hoping it was Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on? I'm not sure how much else we want to say about that.
Sure, we can talk about players that'll be available by our pick, but
yeah,
I mean, it helps to be lucky, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it's good to be lucky. I'm sure he's going to be excited though, right? Like that's a good market. It's a huge market without being the pressure cooker that Montreal is and would be if you're a French Canadian superstar, right? Like I think there's that benefit for him. So I actually really like the fit for him, just because you get the big stage without, as much of the scrutiny. Although that's me coming from a non-New York area market, so I'm not sure if you would feel differently than that. But my perspective is that the media is less scrutinous.
Yeah, and that's just in general because hockey isn't as popular in the area.
Yeah.
Baseball, that's a separate story. But
I've heard about baseball. I was actually a Yankees fan for a long time.
Yeah.
But that's a different story.
Yeah.
We definitely don't have time for that one. So
12.5% chance.
We've talked about who we like at 7, and I think it's kind of the usual suspects of Jamie Drysdale, Alexander Holtz, Perfetti, Marco Rossi, and so forth. I'm not sure if you have anything more to say about that before you start to look at numbers 18 to 20. Do you have a definite preference for 7, barring I would say like the top 3, like the Lafrenières, the Sutzlas, and Byfield?
I think at this point, it's down to 3, potentially down to 2 choices. I'll start with 3 and then I'll go to 2. My preference would be either Rossi. I'll go in order of preference. So between Rossi, Sanderson, and Holtz. So.
Okay. Are you assuming Drysdale is off the board, or
this would be assuming Drysdale's off the board? Yeah.
Okay.
If he wasn't off the board, wow. I still think I'd take Sanderson before Drysdale, but that's a really tough choice. I'm glad I don't have to make that choice.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't really have any skin in the game other than, that the usual agony and ecstasy of just being a sports fan with, zero control of the outcome.
Yeah.
I think for me, the more I've read into this, the more I'm really liking what Alexander Holtz could do on this team. It obviously fits the need.
40 goal score article you wrote.
Well, yeah, I'm trying not to plug that too much, but, if you are curious, you could check out the website. But the idea of someone who has the potential to score 40 goals, and there's, I'm a huge believer in the fact that he does. To me, Holtz, given just his size and his strength and shooting ability, it's not a question of if he'll make the NHL. It's like, okay, is he going to score 20 goals or is it 30 or 40? Because he has the size. He's actually a pretty detailed back checker. Like, he's a supportive guy. And the fact that he's able to score as much as he can from the outside, if you give him smaller ice and kind of push him in that direction and train him on how to get to high danger areas, forget about it. But, he's probably my preference just stylistically. And I think there's a very good argument to make that he would be best player available at 7, obviously depending on who else is there. And of course, I'm a huge Rossi fan just because I watched way too much of the Ottawa 67s this year. But something about a player with size and strength and that fits that kind of positional need, that's definitely up there for me. The more interesting question maybe is what comes after pick number 7. So like, as we saw before, who could we draft at around 18, 19, 20, 21, give or take? So Ian, you gave a bunch of names and then I added a bunch of them on top of there. Is there a few guys on here that you would want to talk about?
I do. I do like Holloway's game because I have a soft spot for like goal-scoring power forwards. His numbers weren't all that great, and that's for a combination of factors. I would argue he was a freshman in the NCAA playing in his draft eligible year, which is not an easy league. Wisconsin kind of struggled this season, which is really odd considering the amount of talent that they had. But Wisconsin struggled nonetheless. But there's a lot of potential for Holloway to, if he can put it all together, to be a power sniper. I don't know if that's it's a really weird phrase, but like a goal scoring power winner. Yeah, that makes more sense. So he's one. Caden Gould is he's a real throwback defenseman, like your classic standard WHL, like mean, physical, hits you as soon as he tries to hit you as soon as he can, shut the play down as soon as it starts to develop. Good skater too. I'd be happy with him. Schneider, I'll talk about Schneider and it'll be the last one. Schneider is a bit of a more different defenseman than Gould, because Schneider is more of he's still a physical player, but more of a cerebral defenseman. So he's more patient. He picks his spots better. He can see plays developing, and he's more calm under pressure. So in that sense, I mean, Schneider is a bit more of a, not to use buzzwords, I'm sorry, I'm going to use a buzzword here, but I think he has a little bit of a safer projection path towards the NHL because of that than Caden. But both would be really exciting.
Yeah, I like Schneider a lot, just because I feel like he is, like, I guess, more in the modern mold.
Yeah.
And part of his game reminds me a bit of Ty Smith, not in terms of like the entire style, but when Ty Smith is being reined in, and like you and I talked to the GM, right? We talked about how Ty Smith plays when he's kind of on a leash, and then when the coach lets him loose when they're down by 2 goals. The way he plays when he's on a kind of a tighter leash, a very like efficient, low risk but effective kind of distribution of the puck. I see a bit of that in Schneider. Like he doesn't make a ton of risky plays, but he's good at stripping the puck and just moving it very quickly. He's someone I think is really interesting. You and I have talked offline about Dylan Holloway a bit, and I know we have kind of differing opinions on him, just because for me, and this might be like, just being too close to it, I get some serious Pavel Zacha vibes from Dylan Holloway, and not necessarily like in the best way. To me, maybe I see him as a bit more of a risk, just because, he has the tools, but you're hoping the offense follows. And his whole team was bad this year, so you have to take that into account. And he's definitely someone that has the effort and the individual skills. But ever since, Zacha has kind of panned out the way he has, and I still have hope in him to develop. To me, when you're looking at a pick that high, I'm like, maybe you shoot for like a higher ceiling if you're looking at a forward. So that's kind of, I don't know, kind of where I end up there. I really like Maverick Bourque. He's someone I think is really interesting here. And I mean, you look at all these prospects, and I included the rankings of kind of the 3 major news outlets that we tend to look at year to year. We definitely look at more than this, but these tend to be, maybe the bigger 3. And there's a huge range of variance, right? Like you look at someone like Bourque, and you go from 19 to 28. Dylan Holloway, you go from 15 to 29. Like that's how, I don't want to say subjective, but that's how different the opinions can be about these players. And I think Bourque is really interesting just because, his shot is really good, but the biggest part of his game comes from, other parts of it. Like he's an amazing penalty kill specialist. He has, I would say, like a very good hockey IQ, which is a phrase I don't fully understand, but try to use sometimes. Like he's very good at thinking about the game, because he isn't necessarily the fastest player, Like, he works really hard. He's got a good motor, but he has to think a couple steps ahead to be as effective as he is. You know, obviously center isn't a huge need for us, but he's someone that could be a really interesting, pesky, talented winger, you know, in the mold of like a Blake Coleman, but hopefully kind of just of a slightly higher caliber. I don't know. I think he's interesting. And Rodi Namirov is, you know, kind of I would say a bit of a crapshoot. He's such an interesting, you know, interesting character just because he's kind of a jack of all trades. You know, he's got that like really intense, dynamic one-on-one quality, but he's also a bit of a turnover machine. So if you pick him at around this part of the draft, you're probably taking a bet that he's going to develop the good parts of his game, like the one-on-one, the ability to make really creative plays. And you're just going to drill into him that he can't give up the puck, that he has to be much more efficient when it comes to, you know, cutting to the inside of the ice. So he's a bit more of a wild card there, I would say, of this group. I mean, I guess Noel Gunler is up there too, but, you know, if you're looking at offensive ceilings on this list, to my perspective, you're looking at Gunler or Amarov.
And that's fair because Gunler is also a goal-scoring winger.
Yeah.
A little different, like you said, a little different from Amirov. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is none of these players would be they're going to be first-round picks, but I guess the way to put it would be none of these players would be bad choices at 18 to 20.
Yep.
They would all of them would be good, solid additions to the pipeline.
Yeah. We had a couple more names here. Just because it was hard to nail it down or like bring it down to 6, and that's how big this kind of tier of the draft is, right? Like you have the top 3, you know, you have Lafreniere in his own, and then the next 2, and then a group, you know, up to maybe 10, and then from there on, you know, the discussion gets much more varied. Some of these names might be a bit surprising just given where they're ranked. I wanted to talk about maybe the first 2, and I know you're a big fan of Brisson at the end, but Lukas Reichel is someone I think is really interesting, and I think is, you know, a clear-cut potential top 6 player. He kind of brings a bit of everything to his game. Like I would say he's very much an all-around, like two-way kind of dual threat player. Like he's good at playmaking, he's good at shooting. He doesn't have the best shot, but he has enough individual tools where he would be able to succeed doing both. He's a good skater, but not the fastest. So he has more of that kind of four-way mobility that we talk about. He's able to change directions. He's able to be agile. And despite being, I would say, offensively gifted, especially when it comes to really charging to the center of the ice, he's actually very well refined when it comes to two-way play. So he's basically a guy that does everything, but nothing individually exceptionally well. So he was more of a safe pick in this range, but I think he definitely has top 6 potential. And then it gets a bit spicier, I'd say, and we start talking about Tristan Robbins, who on most boards is a 2nd-round pick. And to my mind, I have a hard time figuring out why, just because, you know, he's someone that he basically does everything. Like he is a bit smaller. I think he's listed at 5'10", but for what it's worth, in the Hockey Prospect Black Book, there's a quote where apparently he says he's now 5'11". Not that an inch really matters all that much, but you know, there it is. But he's like a very explosive offensive player. He's someone that has like a constant motor. So like if you think about a player like, you know, who's someone that is like always going 100%, not necessarily in terms of speed, but in terms of effort. Like for some reason, I keep on thinking of like, it always comes back to Blake Coleman or like Brad Marchand, like someone who is always grinding away. He has that quality to him. But despite that, he's also very good at slowing the pace of the game down and making creative plays that way. So, you know, you have someone like Michael McLeod, who is great at going 110%, but sometimes struggles with not doing that. Like it doesn't always have the ability to slow down the game and make the proper play depending on how the play is developing. Tristan Robbins definitely has that, and he's just got such good hands, such good vision. To my mind, I think you're crazy if you have him, outside the first round on your list. But yeah, he's definitely someone whose game I've fallen in love with over the past couple of months. I think he's just incredible. Tell me about Brisson or Robbins, because I know we've been chatting about him too.
Well, I mean, I'll just note that Robbins, I really like the pace of play, pushing the pace of play, everything else you mentioned. Just a fun player. Brisson is really interesting. Kind of reminds me in the mold of like a Cole Perfetti, in that very, very smart player and very high natural skill level, puck skills and whatnot. But there's improvement to be made with the skating. Now he's like Perfetti, he's smart enough to be able to adapt his game to kind of compensate for his, not high end, like high speed or mobility, whatnot. So that's definitely an area of concern. But I mean, it was also, on a side note, very fun watching him play, because he was on the Chicago Steel of the USHL, which is probably, I mean, this is going to sound a little dramatic or whatnot. Outside of the UN, the National Development Programs, the Chicago Steel team this year was one of, if not the best USHL teams ever. They've got, it's hard to think of, it's hard to remember all the names of players that are projected to go in the first two rounds on that team. And Brisson is one of them. So he loves shooting with he loves using a slap shot. He's very good at seeing passing lanes on the ice, and he can make those passes. Just the only question is how much he'll be able to adapt his game if he can't significantly improve his skating. And not like it actively holds him back, but it's a different level from the USHL to the NHL. Ask Jack Hughes. So
yeah, one thing sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just to close up, I mean, I really like the combination of smarts and just puck skills.
Yeah. One thing I've seen from him that I really love, and this is coming from a very frustrating year of watching, players fumble really creative passes from Jack Hughes in the slot, is that Brisson is the kind of guy that's great at handling those passes and either roofing the puck or just finding a way to jam it in. Like he's one of the kinds of players that is able to make very split-second decisions when he sees the puck is coming to a stick and he wasn't expecting it. Kind of like a JVR quality, where like you park him in front of the net. He doesn't have the size that JVR does, but like you put him in front of the net and you direct the puck towards him, and he's going to find a way to direct it towards the net, as opposed to, and I love the guy, but I saw way too many passes from Jack Hughes to like a Wayne Simmons that it just didn't work, like he just couldn't find a way to jam it in like he would have 3 seasons ago, because that was his bread and butter too. Brisson is a guy that is amazing at cleaning up that sort of, dirty work on top of the exceptional skills he has on his own. So he's really interesting there too, because you can start to see, okay, like I could see how this would work stylistically. But like you said, I think there's definitely questions about skating, but we've seen players with average skating still have impact, right? Like, there are even some players like that on the Devils. It definitely makes it harder, but especially if you dine out in front of the net and you're able to take the punishment that comes with that, then, maybe skating is somewhat less important. And that's coming from me, a former Michael McLeod fanboy. So that should say something, right?
Yeah.
So we had some questions. I think it would be interesting to put a top 25 at some point ahead of the draft, just to give some perspective on kind of who might go where. I'm probably not prepared to do that in an official capacity. I've definitely tried to prep a bit of a draft board for the first couple rounds. It's really complicated, man. Like, I know you do this much more often than I do. I'm just trying to learn from you, but it takes so much work. Like, there's so much to consider, and I struggle with, going back and forth about whether all of this is actually subjective, or if there is some sort of like objective truth about how skilled these guys are, and we just have different degrees of success in finding that out.
So
is that too much of a grenade to toss?
It's like it's like Rashomon, except for hockey prospects.
I don't even know what to think about that, but part of me struggles with that idea that, like, I've tried or started to talk to people who are, like, involved in looking at the game, and people tend to have pretty hard opinions, right? Like, they have like their view through X amount of viewings and, X amount of years of experience. And it's like, okay, this is what this player is. And to me, as a complete amateur, like, that's a really hard thing for me to try to do, because I don't even know if I agree that, we can define a player like that, because there's so many variables. And you add that into the mix of, like, not only do you have to pick them, and if they have, a finite amount of potential, then you have to develop them. And that's a whole nother story. You basically end up with the fact that we're never going to know how much potential these kids actually have, because they have to go from point A to point B, and there are a million things that happen to them in between. I really struggle with the fact that, like, everyone could just be wrong, or different degrees of wrong about how skilled a guy like Tristan Robbins would be, and that there's no real, finite definition of, like, oh, he's a first rounder or he's not. I don't actually know how that works.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I'm sure every person that evaluates talent has this spectrum that's not the same. I mean, it's the balance between how safe is it that the player that you pick is going to make it to the NHL versus how high is their potential ceiling.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, while we're continuing with this crazy year, as I keep getting emails from school saying, unprecedented time. I'm sure you have to wonder also if teams are going to be a little more cautious, if anything, drafting a non-Euro player, for example, because, we're not sure when the CHL just announced that they're going to try and start. Do you remember the date? I can't remember the date off the top of my head.
I don't either. I think it's around December, though, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's December. But that's, a significant amount of time missed. Also, on top of that, by the time that the draft even rolls around, the European leagues are already going to have started. So it's just a little bit more chaotic, even more so.
Oh, 100%. And I'm also coming to grips with the fact that no one in the Devils draft in, I guess, October will be on the roster next season. Right? Basically, right? Like, if we end up with one of the Swedish guys, they're going to be in Sweden for the year. Any CHL player that we select will probably be outside of the scope of players who would play next season, barring maybe Marco Rossi. But I'm not confident that players in his situation, because he'll probably sign a contract in Europe just to be safe, because he doesn't want to go back to the CHL. I'm not even sure he would be allowed to come back if he starts, right? Like, it's one thing for the players like Sharon Govich, for example, that have been loaned to Europe. That's something arranged by their NHL team, and they can come back when the time is right. I don't think a player like Rossi is in that position. So basically, anyone that we select, we're not going to see them for a year. If they're CHL or otherwise, they might come to training camp, or if there's some sort of prospect camp. We're talking about a player that's going to come into the game at least a year later. So, maybe safe is better, just because you're not going to see them anyways. So, pick them, let them marinate, and make sure that there's something coming to your roster the next season, because the cap's not moving up, and you're going to need those entry-level contracts. But to me, part of that's interesting because, as the Devils have 3 first-round picks, Not that I think they'll necessarily keep all of them, but if teams are going more safe, then that's quite the opportunity to take a couple swings, right? And take advantage of that. Like that would basically be a market inefficiency where teams are being overly cautious. And if there's a player, like in my perspective, like a Rodion Amirov is someone that probably deserves to go in the low teens. If he's there at 20, he's definitely more of a boom or bust kind of guy. But if you have two other picks, it's probably, you can probably get away with choosing a player like that. I don't know. I think it's interesting, trying not to think about the first overall situation. The Devils have a lot of kind of market type things or market level things that they can take advantage of just because they have the cap, they have extra draft capital, and they have a new GM that's going to be pretty motivated to make his mark because, the clock's ticking basically.
Yeah, and I don't know. I keep thinking that we're going to use two of our first rounders to draft, and then maybe one to trade or trade back. But also at the same time, it's not really a bad idea to just draft with all three, try and get as high quality as possible, or maybe just wait a year because next year is going to be the flat cap still, and there's going to be the expansion draft. So,
Yep, I think that's fair too. Like you're never going to have the chance again to hopefully to draft in the first round 3 times because hopefully we're not selling at in 2 years. I wonder to what degree a guy like Jenny Kuokkanen would be viewed as a trade chip. Like I know they really like him, and there was every indication that he was going to get called up more on a more permanent basis for the end of the season. But if you have if you want to spend the picks, but you also want to make a move for like a top 4D, you need more capital to play with, and the Devils aren't exactly flush with draft picks in the future. So I think you do have some flexibility there to kind of move things around and take full advantage. So I saw a question in the chat. Do you think Seth Jarvis drops to the range where the Devils could reasonably select him? I know you and I talked about him as kind of the dream for 18.
Yeah.
To the point where we didn't feel it was realistic to even list him. What do you think of the chances there?
Yeah, I was thinking of putting him on our list, but I don't see him dropping. If he is there, it doesn't matter who else, reasonably doesn't matter who else is on the board. He would be the top pick for me at 18 or wherever we pick. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening. But that would be fantastic.
I think there's even a chance he could go like 10, like as high as like around, 9 to 12. He's a player that has that much talent, I think. And, if you are swinging for offensive ceiling, past the first couple of guys, he's probably as good as you get. He's a really interesting player and definitely a dream, I think, of both of ours to get with, some of these later picks, but I'm not sure that's entirely realistic. Ty Smith all over again. I hope so. Seth Jarvis. We can definitely start putting those good vibes into the universe, but I'm not terribly optimistic. But I mean, Ian, I guess to be fair, you also felt the same way about Ty Smith heading into that draft.
Yeah, that's true. So we just need to start spreading the rumors that Seth Jarvis follows the traffic laws in Grand Theft Auto. No team will pick him then.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of non-sequiturs.
Yeah, exactly. Any other parting thoughts before we head out? This has been a bit of a whirlwind.
Yeah, I'll start off with a really negative thought, and then I'll work up from there. Just a few weeks ago, we were looking at the possibility of pick 6, 10, and 16. And I think it just goes to show that yes, we've had plenty of luck in the with the draft lottery in a few years, but this is why scouting is so important. This is why you have to trust your scouting staff, your development staff, and the pieces the pieces are almost there. I mean, we've got a good group of players. Ironically, seeing how much the Rangers defense struggled made me kind of not worried so much about the Lindy Ruff hiring. I do think, honestly, with the Lindy Ruff hiring too, not to get too sidetracked, if he can help bring out Hughes' offensive potential, that's a success in and of itself. But we have a really good young core growing between Jack, Nico, and potentially Ty Smith. We'll see when he gets to the league. I think that'll be this coming season. And Blackwood. And we've also got a bunch of really talented players in the pipeline, plus whoever we end up picking at 7. Things are on the up and up. It hasn't been an easy rebuild because we didn't really start with much. But yeah, 2020 keeps throwing those punches. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think what you mentioned is true though. Like we do have, for the first time, some sort of depth in the system. It might not be top tier depth, but number 7 alone will do a lot to help that. I think, yeah, if you draft twice and then you make a trade for a top 4D, and then you start to nurture some of the defensive prospects that we have, I think you're en route to compete in the next few seasons. It might not be immediate, but yeah, just be thankful it's a team that has the cap space it has with the flat cap that we're going to be looking at. That alone is going to be an advantage for us. And we have the ability to be patient with the young players we have and let them develop and then take advantage in those other ways. And I think you're in a pretty good spot. So yeah, obviously not the best night for the Devils, but we're still on track and all you can do is focus on yourself. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I guess we'll sign off. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Obviously not the result we're looking for, but yeah, I think we're both still, what's the phrase we like to use? Cautiously optimistic about the Devils themselves. So
one more question in the chat, just if we could go over our thoughts again about the Riley Walsh signing, because that was pretty significant. Like, what do you think of him? Very direct question.
I think it's great news, right? Like it's only good news because it's just added depth, and I think it's cues of thinking more. And this is going to take Devils fans a bit longer to get used to. The fact that our defensive prospects now, I would say, vastly outweigh our forward prospects in terms of potential, right? Like with Jack Hughes graduated, we're looking at Jesper Boqvist, Yanni Kuokkanen, and then a bit of a drop when we get to the level of McLeod and Bastian and so forth. So if there was ever any doubt that we need to draft, you know, as long as his best player available, a forward at 7, there we go. Because he's, you know, he definitely slots in as a potential top 6, maybe top 4 if you're super lucky defenseman that can add some damage on the power play. Good skating, definitely not physical, definitely struggles in his own end, you know, in terms of protecting the crease, but he does a lot of things really well. You know, good transition player. He has a lot to offer. And I think you were texting earlier, like an interesting person to pair with, you know, like a Nikita Okachuk or something like that, you know, like pair him with someone more defensively responsible, someone that can beat people up. You know, that's interesting. What about you?
Cool. Yeah. If anything, he's got potential to be a shooter on the power play. There's more to his game than that, but at a baseline, he's got an NHL shot. And on a side note, too, Binghamton's going to be really, really interesting to watch next year. A lot of young talent coming up, including, I would assume Okachuk is going to be there, and I would assume Walsh is going to be there too. So, yeah, I mean, it's great. Always good to have more talent in the pipeline officially signed, and good that we can take a risk on using one of our contracts on a talented player like Walsh. So,
agreed, and that comes with the territory of not handing out contracts like candy, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the ability to do that when the prospect kind of finally feels like signing. So that's nice too, to be kind of regionally managed in that way. So yeah, it's only good news. Like you mentioned, Binghamton, if there is an AHL season next year, we'll have a pretty young defense core, but with some really interesting, medium to high end talent. Who knows, Ty Smith could even be there. So I think that's really interesting moving forward. So I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining us and hanging out with us. Yeah, definitely an interesting evening, to say the least. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for joining us.